let's tell you about who we actually are. What is Liberty Charge? This slide kind of does us a bit of justice as to who we are and what we're trying to achieve. So essentially, Liberty Charge was launched in March earlier this year. And it's a joint venture between Liberty Global, who some people may not have heard of, and indeed Zoot Capital. And they are the management of the Infrastructure SIFT Fund. And together, they merged their thoughts and split into this brand new company called Liberty Charge. Why that's really important is because Liberty Global actually is the parent company of Virgin Media. And as we all know, Virgin Media has an amazing footprint of delivering connectivity across the whole of the UK. And I'll get into that a bit later on. But the whole point of the company and the whole point of what we're trying to achieve here is to ensure that we've got a good, ready amount of public on-street charge points for electric vehicles. So our whole business is to ensure that there is access for when we do make the switch over to a brand new EV car, to make sure that you have that ability and feel comfortable in knowing that there's a charge point around the corner that's going to work for you when you need it. So we're working in partnership with local authorities and charge point operators to ensure that we can do this across the country. Now, why are we doing this? I've kind of touched on it slightly, but as we all know, pollution is, tailpipe pollution is one of the biggest and most fatal things in society at the moment, and it impacts our health significantly. And the UK government, indeed the government, has decided that it's at this time that we really need to accelerate that process in moving car drivers, car users, and indeed commercial vehicle drivers as well, away from those gas guzzling cars that we're all commonly used to. And that's been part of our daily life for so many years in the world, actually. So what's been published? So the government has put down some key indicators, which is a journey towards a really good decarbonation transport plan, which looks at the reduction of tailpipe emissions for new cars, and hopes to nudge people into cleaner, more sustainable electric vehicles that are better for the environment and better for our health. And when you look at this slide, it kind of talks about the amount of trips that we take on our daily life within our cars. And what you'll notice that actually we still do quite a lot of driving in our private vehicles. Now, I know there's also a push to change that as well, into us moving into more shared vehicles, using more public transport. And I believe that will come, and it's something that we're very keen to be involved in. In fact, we think things like car sharing is an amazing way to reduce the amount of cars that are currently on the road as it stands. So as we all may have heard in the news recently, and over the past few months indeed, there's set targets around us moving to those EVs, and the newest one is that we want to ensure that we stop selling fuel into cars by 2030, 2035, and there's currently a consultation ongoing that brings it to that 2035 point, and we're hoping that consultation simply says, look, let's try and bring this forward. Let's I know that's a 2050 plan was talked about a few years ago, but let's, as a country, come together and try and switch our cars, and let's force this onto the manufacturers to say, look, we want you to be producing more cleaner vehicles for us to use. But that poses its own problem, because as you see at the bottom of the slide, more than a third of households in England don't have access to off-street parking. And when you start looking at the densely populated urban areas where air quality is a particular concern, this becomes more acute, and that number dramatically increases. So what Liberty Charge is trying to do is think about how we can solve this using the infrastructure that we already have with Virgin Media, and indeed the relationships that we have across the country. Now, when I talk about this, I'm talking about the amazing work that Virgin Media does. I mean, they do really great work across the country. They connect and light up over 450,000 new homes a year to give them fibre capability across the country, and connectivity that we all need, especially in this trying time. They've got a number of power cabinets with DNO connections, and that's key. So I'll talk about that in a second. And they've got ducting route over 170 kilometres of it. That's also key, because what this means is that if we could lean on all of this infrastructure, we can actually perhaps provide the power and data connectivity to the charge points that we could possibly install across the country. And what it also means is that actually we may not have to dig up as much, because we've already got those ducts in the ground. So the thing that I hate most is, especially what happened in my street yesterday, where you saw someone dig up the roads, and then it was about 3 months ago, I saw another team digging up that same piece of roads to do another piece of work. What we're trying to do is actually go, well, we've already got the ducting there. Maybe we can pull some cables through and make it a lot easier to install. And so we only have to return to a particular location at one point. And then we look at the capabilities of the Virgin Media team, and when we look at what they do across the country, they deploy large-scale infrastructure, tons of lightning projects that we're all very aware of. We've got those trusted relationships with local authorities, civil contractors, and DNOs. DNOs, for those that don't know, is the network distributor of energy, the electrical energy, and the grid that we all know that's across the country, that electricity underneath the ground. And the reason why it's really important is because if we do have some powered cabinets with Virgin Media, then perhaps we can use those to power some of the charge points without needing to put what we call as a feeder pillar, which takes the energy up, puts it into one place, and then feeds the charge points. So for us, we thought, well, this is a really good market to play in, and actually we can deliver quite a unique offer to residents, to CPOs, and to indeed local authorities. So what could that mean? We're looking at the type of charge points that we would want to deliver with this infrastructure, and our specific focus is delivering this infrastructure for on-street residential charging. We want this to be available for residents up and across the country who don't have access to at-home charging. Now, there are many other different types of charge points that you'll see whilst you're out and about. You've got your destination charging, which you'll normally find in car parks when you're going to your local grocery store, or indeed to your shopping centre. And then you may have seen the rapid charging hubs, the phone boxes, as I call them, style charging that you may see at your stop stations when you're up and down, going up and down the motorways throughout the country, And those offer you a really, really, really rapid charge. So those are generally 50 kilowatts and above. Destination charging are generally about 22 kilowatts above. But where we're really interested in is, as I said before, is that on-street residential charge point where we can deliver between 3 and 22. Ultimately, we want to deliver between 7 and 22 kilowatt charge, which means that when you plug in your car, you can leave it there overnight. And if you're on a 40 kilowatt battery, let's say, in your electric vehicle, you can generally get quite a good charge for a number of miles within your vehicle. So this is our business model. Maybe I shouldn't be sharing this, but I am. And essentially, what we're looking at is providing the infrastructure of what you need underneath the ground at a really, really good rate for everyone. So it means we're dealing with the local authorities because we already have those relationships. We're managing that connection underneath the ground, and we're tapping into our cabinets, ductings, and all our connections to provide that infrastructure that's needed for the many, many electric vehicles that are going to be on our streets over the next few years. So we take care of that. That's about 80% of the work that's needed to deliver a charge point to any residential location. And then the charge point operator, who could in some cases be the local authority, for example, if they want to own and maintain their own charge points, they deliver that customer experience to you and to other residents. And what they do is they install and they maintain that electric vehicle charge point. So it's what we deem as the iceberg model, and indeed it's working really well across the country with a lot of local authorities and CPOs that we speak to, and it just means that we can deliver at scale quite quickly to meet the needs and requirements that we all speak about, and what the government has published in a number of their documentation. But with that, and we are talking at the Merge Futures events, we need to talk about what we're trying to do to make those smart. Charge points don't just need to be a point where you plug in your car to get your charge required for your car. With the amount of connectivity that we could offer at a particular location, and the ducts that we have, and the offer that we have in our collaboration with Virgin Media, it means that we can enhance the communities in so many different ways. We can actually think about a true smart city, and the way we do that is by looking in and thinking, well, now that we could possibly have data at the connectivity, at this point in the street next to a charge point. Well, what else can we do with that data? And that's really, really, really important, because we can start to look at perhaps looking at air quality sensors in those areas. We can start thinking about, well, actually, we can monitor the air quality in a particular location, so we can see that perhaps the direct impacts, positive impacts of having a charge point in an area. We can look at smart parking. So there's been a number of trials that have happened over the past couple of years, where we're thinking about perhaps installing sensors into car parking spaces, so we know exactly when that space is free. You can drive to that space and know that actually that charge point is going to be available, or indeed any other space that you'd want to drive to and park at whilst you're in your vehicle. So it makes that interaction with that space, almost with that street scene, really, really interesting. And then of course we can start looking at smart refuge. This is just a small amount of things that we can do with that data connectivity. We could possibly look at sensors within refuge bins to understand when it's best to come and collect rubbish at the end of the week, and know where everyone's levels are within their bins, so we can have perhaps more frequent or less frequent journeys to collect refuge in our local communities, meaning that that could mean that those employees or those local authorities can push that resources in other directions, or indeed know that we need to be more regular in those visits. And of course, the main point that we could possibly do at these sites is offer Wi-Fi, great connectivity. We could possibly have a Wi-Fi point in next to these charge points that we can all use, and have that data joint up thinking for all of us. So there's a plethora of things that we can do with the connectivity that we can lean on with the Virgin Media network that we hope that we'll be joining onto. And it doesn't just need to be, so it doesn't just need to think of this is helping the environment, helping everyone feel more comfortable in switching TVs, but actually there's that enhanced service and that enhanced capability for every site that we look to deploy in the future. So I'm going to talk about VPAC, and VPAC is something that's really, really interesting, because actually VPAC is this in action. Essentially, we are working with Northamptonshire County Council, and we're doing some really, really exciting work with them, and we're actually making this idea into something that's really, really true and actualized. So when we talk about VPAC, it's short for Virgin Media Park and Charge. It's a project that's part of the electric vehicle charging for public spaces feasibility studies competition, and it's funded by the Office of Low Emissions in partnership with the Innovate UK. And within that, the consortium that we've put together includes a number of local authorities that recognise this is a key area that we need to address. And we've all put our thinking hats on, and we thought about how best to address this issue. As I said, it's over 10 local and combined authorities within that. We've put together a great set of delivery specialists and partners, all the way from obviously Virgin Media, but all of those that are around the future thinking of connecting these charge points, and quite importantly, Loughborough University, and I'll talk about what they're trying to do and what they're doing for us for the consortium in a second. And the current state of that is that actually by sites we mean locations for charge points to be installed. We've identified over 1,000 sites across all of these regions, so West Midlands Combined Authority, Liverpool, and Wandsworth and Croydon. With all these areas, got a number of sites out to consultation. So we want to speak to local residents and understand what they think about these charge points and where they want them to be placed. And we've got over 100 sites that are really close to being deployed. So 100 locations ready to have these on-street residential charge points being installed and ready for us residents and for all the residents across those regions to make that switch to EVs and plug in and charge. So the reason why that Loughborough University relationship is also really important is because as part of VPAC, what we're trying to do actually is to create and develop a tool that recognizes where there's the most need for electric vehicle charge points, because that's really, really important. Is we don't want to put a charge point in the middle of a field that no one's ever going to go to, and it sits there and it's just the wrong place for a charge point to be in. We want to put these charge points in locations where they have the most impact and where people can actually see this in motion and feel confident to make that switch. So they've done an array of analysis to predict EV adoption, and they're looking at the densities in certain areas. They're looking at things like house type to understand if you have a drive. And perhaps you may not need an on-street residential charge point because you could install one at home. And there's a number of different things that they're looking at to produce a tool that actually we'll work in locating the best locations for these charge points. And if you look at the example here, because we are talking about Northampton here in this instance, we've looked at the neighbourhood of Arlington to the east of the city, where we've picked out that this possibly could be a great area for EV adoption, where there's a need that's possibly there. And then what we do is we take this away. We work with the local authority officers that have been amazing throughout this process. And we speak to them, we understand what the local constraints are and what needs to be done in those locations. I imagine I know I'm coming to the end very quickly, but that's part of the process. Speak to the local authorities, understand what's needed, and then we speak to the local residents. Now, in terms of that point, in terms of understanding what local residents want, well, we've been doing that, and we ran a consultation earlier this year with a number of sites where we surveyed over 3,000 addresses and received a really good, close to 500 responses back about what they thought about electric vehicle charging infrastructure, about us installing these great charge points in their local areas. And what you soon find is that actually there's a lot of support for this. A lot of people recognise the need for this new infrastructure to be in place, and perhaps want to make that change. And that's backed up by when we talk about who's thinking about buying an electric vehicle. Well, actually, over close to two thirds, are considering buying an electric vehicle in the next 5 years, and over 20% are considering buying in the next 2 years. So essentially, what we're really looking at is residents wanting this infrastructure, residents thinking about that switch to EV. They just really, ideally, need that infrastructure in for us to really roll on and get the ball rolling and get these charge points, and so they can make that change. So that was a really insightful consultation that took place there. And we'll be continuing these consultations in different areas and different regions all over Northamptonshire, and indeed all over the country in the next coming years. And in closing, I know we're running out slightly out of time. I would say that if anyone wants to be involved in this, because this is about us coming together as communities across the UK. Maybe you want your organisation to become electrified and the fleet to be electric, or maybe you just want a charge point in your area and want to find out the best ways to do that. Please get in touch with the team at libertycharge.co.uk, and we can help you get to that goal, so we can all have electrified streets in really smart cities. So I'm open to any questions, and I'll hand over to the team for any questions that are coming.
Thanks very much, Cecil. That's great. I think there might have been a couple of issues with your microphone, whether you want to try putting the headset on. I'll just have a look at the questions in the meantime. We've had a few questions in. One of them is, what could stop you installing a charging point? And are there any no-go areas?
So there are a number of things that can stop us installing a charge point, and they range quite significantly, actually. So it could be the fact there's a lack of connectivity, a lack of power connectivity in a particular area, and there's no DNO connection there. And there's things like pavement widths. We want to ensure that, if these are publicly available charge points, we want to ensure that there's enough space that once a pavement, or once you install a charge point in a public place, that there's enough circulation space for that car to go around. There's safety concerns. There's some residents may indeed want to drop curbs, things like this. There's so many criteria to selecting a really, really good site. But those are generally the major barriers, I would say, is understanding where there's power available in a particular location, and indeed maintaining that good street scene. So we don't have too much street clutter and having that good paving width for residents to circulate around any new infrastructure that's being installed.
Okay, we've got quite a few questions coming in. Barry's asked, did the survey also cover if people wanted fast charging or overnight charging?
Yes, indeed. Although this is specifically for residential charging, as I said before, we try and range that between 7 and 22. There was an offer. Definitely had a number of responses that simply asked the question of what charging speeds do you want? And we had a lot of residents come back and say, well, we don't want 7, we don't want 22, we want 50. And so it's a mixture of both. So we took all of those comments on board, and that's helping decide what speeds of charging, what types of charging should be installed in those locations.
Okay, we've got Steve Marshall, a friend of Digital Northampton. He's asked, as an Abington resident, so an area of Northampton, I'm very intrigued by potential plans to make infrastructure available here, as I believe it would be beneficial. What is the current thinking on how this could work in tight terrace streets like you get in Abington? Because a friend of his has to drive 6 miles to currently charge his electric vehicle.
That's a really good question, because we have to understand the streets in. Again, that's one of the criteria. What we don't want to do is start putting charge points. At the moment, we're trying to put charge points in the front of residential homes, for example. We want to protect residential immunity as much as possible. So what you'll generally find is that we're trying to look for sites on the flanks of homes where there is some passive supervision over them. And if there are, let's say, tight pavements, an example, we are considering putting build-outs in the carriageway, so it ensures that we can still get the infrastructure in those areas that's needed. But please do get in touch with the email address on the screen, and we'll try our best to help find the sites in your location.
Okay, excellent. A few more questions. How can we ensure the CPO's technology keeps pace with latest demand and developments so that we don't become outdated?
Really good question, and that's exactly why. Actually, in most scenarios, we look for a 3-phase connection, which is just ensuring that we can get up to that up to those higher speeds. So in most cases, the CPO signs an agreement which ensures that there's a refresh should there need be one. In most cases, most charge points that currently are in operation have a Type 2 charge point lead, which covers just over 90% of most cars at the moment. And indeed, in the future, if that's the case, that this charging type changes, or indeed the speed needs to change, there is the remit within the CPO agreements to ensure that they make those changes for the community in most CPO agreements.
Fantastic. Still a few more questions to get to. Can I charge an e-bike at a charging point?
At the moment, that's not a possibility that I'm aware of, and there are still some safety concerns surrounding that. What I would say to that is that we are in communication with a number of e-mobility providers to discuss things like this at the moment, and you'll note that in the team there that we've got as part of VPAC. We've got a company called Gingertown, which specialises in these types of these e-mobility personal use bikes and scooters. And so we're currently in those discussions to figure out how to give that availability to those users in a safe and proper way.
Okay, next question. Will the energy be green sourced?
In terms of the energy that we're looking to provide, we are looking to provide sustainable energy to these to these charge points that we're indeed hoping to indeed the charge points that we're working with CPOs to try and install indeed via the infrastructure that we provide. So we always take the position as if it's not sustainable energy, or we don't provide sustainable energy, what's the point? Almost, we want to ensure that it's all sustainable. We don't want to be burning coal at one end to make electricity. We want to make sure that the whole journey is sustainable for the user that decides to pick up and charge at a location that we've helped deliver the infrastructure to.
Okay, we've still got questions coming in all the time. Will the grid be able to cope with demand if we all want to charge at the same time?
That's a really important question, and what you'll find is that a number of these smart chargers that are on the market at the moment do have a mechanism in there for load balancing. We are talking by load balancing means understanding when the grid is overly used, knowing when to reduce the amount of energy that they're taking from the grid. And we're working with those network distributors across the country to understand where those areas are that could possibly happen, and working with them when we are applying for a new energy connection in a particular area.
Okay, last couple of questions. I think, how is progress going here, and are we ahead of other areas?
I think progress is going extremely well. What I would do is I'd tip my hat off to the Manchester County Council and the officers that I've been working with there. It's really forward thinking. They're doing extremely amount of good work with residents and trying to really accelerate that process. So it's going extremely well, and expect to see some new charge points dotted around very soon.
Okay, fantastic. I think that covers everything really.
It does. Thank you, Cecil.
No, you're very welcome. And as I said, if there's any further questions, please email the team at libertycharge.co.uk and we will get back to you. Let's all get on this journey together.
Fantastic. And just to say, if you visit smartmovenorthamptonshire.net, there is a survey where you can register interest for a charging point where you live or work.